Hello everyone, my name is Eric. I'm a limited licensed master social worker and psychotherapist. I've been working with children, youth, and adults for 10 years. This video is a continuation of last week's episode on primary psychological defense mechanisms. If you want a primer on what defense mechanisms are, go ahead and watch that first video. I covered the first 4 primary defense mechanisms in that video, and my intention was to cover the rest of the primary defense mechanisms in this one. However, the defense that is the subject of today's video is so important that after writing the script I realized that I literally couldn't cover any of the other defense mechanisms in detail unless I wanted to make a 30 or 60 minute long video, and I simply do not have the attention span for that. So instead, this entire video is going to be dedicated to understanding what I believe to be the single most important defense mechanism that we possess. That is the mechanism of projection. Projection, as it's commonly understood, is when a person unconsciously projects their own disavowed thoughts, feelings, assumptions, and motivations onto other people. Although we project both positive and negative aspects of our own experience onto others, we mainly focus on the projection of the negative aspects of our experience. With that being said, it's still important to consider the implications of projecting positive aspects of our experience. Unfortunately, it happens all too often that good people who only see the good in others are abused and manipulated by darker personalities who easily take advantage of their borderline delusional positivity. Since that could be a subject of an entirely different video, here we'll focus on projection of the negative aspects of experience because it's the most common and the most evident form of projection that we see both inside and outside of our clinical practice. When a person projects, they will have taken their own unconscious thoughts and emotions and attribute them to others. This is most clearly seen in people with bigoted, hateful, and oppressive political ideologies. You know these people. They project their own disdain and misunderstanding onto their political opposition, whether they be social minorities, illegal immigrants, or people who practice different religions, and they believe, self-righteously, that they are the tolerant and loving people, and it's those people who are the problem, and those people need to be fixed, exiled, or exterminated. Nancy McWilliams writes, "Projection is the process whereby what is on the inside is misunderstood as coming from the outside. In its benign form, it is the basis for empathy. Since no one is ever able to get inside the mind of another person, we must use our capacity to project our own experience in order to understand someone else's subjective world. Intuition, leaps of nonverbal synchronicity, and peak mystical experiences of union with another person or group involve a projection of the self into the other, with powerful emotional rewards for both parties. People in love are well known for reading each other's minds in ways that they themselves cannot account for logically." This is projection in a positive sense, which is definitely helpful for our holistic understanding of the adaptive nature of defense mechanisms, but what we tend to see in psychotherapy is that defenses have mostly lost their adaptive effectiveness and are now creating more problems for the person than they are solving. McWilliams continues, "A person who uses projection as his or her main way of understanding the world and coping with life, and who denies or disavows what is being projected, can be said to have a paranoid character." I should note that paranoia has nothing inherently to do with suspiciousness, nor with whether or not the attribution is accurate. The fact that a projection fits does not make it any less a projection. A certain presupposition must be accepted before we can fully link projection with the cognitive distortion of mind reading. As Nancy McWilliams has said, we simply cannot ever read the minds of other people. It is impossible. Any mystical interpretation or intuitive person or psychic or empath who tells you that they can do it is ignorant or lying. If we understand this, we can see how mind reading as a cognitive distortion can be so detrimental. We may think we know other people so well that we think we can know what they're thinking even before it comes out of their mouth. Some of the time we may even be right, due to our empathic and projective abilities, but nothing other than luck and chance makes this possible. When we mind read people, and we believe that we know what they're thinking, like how the socially anxious person knows that people are going to be looking at them and thinking that they're stupid as they fumble over their presentation, we fall into this trap that has no basis in reality. It is, in the literal sense of the word, delusional to believe that you can know what other people are thinking. This is why it's important to understand that virtually everything you see as qualities of other people, good, bad, or indifferent, are the results of projection. Dr. Fanny Brewster, one of the few Black Jungian psychologists and author of The Racial Complex and African Americans and Jungian Psychology, describes with precision how racism has always been the unfortunate and catastrophic result of unconscious projections. If we fight with one another on a one-to-one level, as well as in massive wars, is there a way to see another shadow more clearly? And once we do, pull back the negative projections? Does the shadow projection get withdrawn first as we learn that the things we find intolerable are actually a part of ourselves? Marie-Louise von Franz writes in her book Psychotherapy, basically, we are bound to our environment by a whole system of projections. In fact, the projections even serve as the actual bridge between the individual and the external world and other people. The most blatant manifestations of projections is in the self-righteous political convictions, the isms, and in passionately advocated theories such as scientific preconceptions. As soon as tolerance and humor disappear, we can presume that projections have entered the picture. When we notice that someone is reacting with disproportionate affectivity in discussion and begins to give in to the temptation to discredit his opponent, there are grounds for suspecting that he is projecting something onto his opponent or his theory. The better we understand projection, the easier it becomes to recognize when people are doing it and why they're doing it. Projection, like all defense mechanisms, has a self-protective purpose. The ego-dystonic parts of ourselves, including our shadow complexes, are projected onto others and onto the world to keep us from feeling too much shame, too much anxiety, and too much anger. After all, it is they who hate us. When dealing with spiteful and paranoid people, just remember that they're projecting these contents onto you because it makes them feel better. From that perspective, we can empathize with these people because we all know what it's like to not feel good about ourselves. People who are not psychologically minded are not aware that they're projecting, and insofar as ignorance is bliss, they will never be in the wrong and they will never have to make a change. The burden of responsibility lies on those of us who are insightful enough and aware to recognize our own projections, and to attempt to reduce our negative projections, apologize for when we have projected or are projecting, and to empathize and not criticize those who, by virtue of the nature of projection, are hurting themselves. I always tell my patients that the unfortunate truth is that going to therapy gives you the insight and responsibility that you wish other people had. We can recognize our projections, recognize the dangers of mind reading and other cognitive distortions, and try our best to change who we are, but the people in our lives who have their fair share of the responsibility in causing and maintaining conflicts and discord don't have the privilege of getting an opportunity to truly understand themselves on a deeper level. This realization, at bottom, is the basis for transmuting anger into empathy. When we recognize that those who project are doing so because inwardly they are suffering and trying to protect themselves from feeling hurt, afraid, or angry, we can truly understand them on a different level. It doesn't mean that because we understand projection that this is going to make it easy. In fact, it doesn't really ever get easier having to deal with people with such little insight or willingness to change. But, as Jung said, as any change must begin somewhere, it is with the single individual who will experience it and carry it through. It might be any one of us, but nobody can afford to look round and wait for somebody else to do what he himself is loath to do. That concludes this week's episode on projection as a psychological defense mechanism. Along with projection goes introjection and projective identification. These are lesser-known defenses which correlate to projection in some way, but they deserve to be explored and demonstrated in more detail, so I'll save them for next week's episode. Hopefully everyone watching is getting something out of these videos and is enjoying them as much as I do. Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate your support. Until next time.